Hi, and welcome to the third library podcast on legislation research. In this podcast, we will look at determining whether the legislation you find is currently in force and whether you have an authoritative version of that legislation. We'll then look briefly at referencing legislation in accordance with the AGLC 3 guide. There are two main things you'll want to consider when you found some legislation. The first is whether that legislation is currently in force, and the second is whether you have found an authoritative version of that legislation. Once passed by both houses, a bill is presented to the Governor-General, or just the Governor, for assent on behalf of the Queen. Once a bill has received royal assent, it becomes an Act of Parliament and is assigned an Act number. The Act does not become part of the law until it is proclaimed to be operational, in other words, is deemed to be in force. This is sometimes referred to as the commencement date of the Act. Acts usually come into force either by royal assent, or proclamation, or on a specified date. Commencement information is usually included in Section 2 of the Act. If the Act states that it comes into effect by royal assent, that refers to when it is signed by the Governor or Governor-General. If the Act comes into effect by proclamation, you will need to check the Government Gazette for the state or Commonwealth for that date. The second question is whether it's authoritative. Legislation can be found in both printed and electronic formats. Whether an online act is authoritative will depend on the jurisdiction. For example, online compilations of Commonwealth legislation are authoritative and can be used in legal proceedings, as outlined in the Evidence Amendment Act in the Commonwealth. An authoritative online compilation from the Federal Register of Legislation will always be in Adobe Acrobat or PDF format and will display a symbol with an outline of Australia and a red tick in the centre. In Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia and Northern Territory, the printed version is the only authorised version of the legislation. We hold printed versions of Tasmanian legislation at the Law Library at University of Tasmania. The next thing we're going to look at is how to correctly cite your Act. So when you are citing anything in law, you're using the AGLC 3 guide, the Australian Guide to Legal Citation, Edition 3. The guide contains rules on referencing and formatting. Citation styles for legislation are clearly outlined in the guide. There are print copies of the guide in the library, or you can access the online version of the guide on the Law Subject Guide for AGLC 3. When you are citing legislation, you want to use the short title of the legislation, the year the legislation is passed, and the jurisdiction. The short title of the Act should always appear in italics, and the jurisdiction of the statute appears in brackets after the short title, but is not italicised. The AGLC 3 guide includes how jurisdiction is abbreviated. It is important to note that jurisdiction should always be placed in parentheses following the year and is not in italics. Then the addition of citing in your footnote is to include a pinpoint reference. Pinpoint references in Acts are also included in the AGLC 3 guide. Each pinpoint has an abbreviation and a number. You'll want to refer to the AGLC 3 guide for the correct abbreviation of your pinpoint. So here we're looking at the Defamation Act of 2005 in Tasmania, and Section 4 is our pinpoint. This would not be included in the bibliography, but only in the footnote. The abbreviation for each pinpoint is included in the AGLC 3 guide. Here you'll see sections in plural is 2 S's. So we have sections 4, 5 and 8. You would never write 4, 5 and 8. It would just be commas between the different section numbers. Unlike multiple sections, subsections is sub So you want to be checking the AGLC3 guide for your correct citation. We're just going to go now to a quick look at the guide, just to show you where to look. So here we're looking at the library homepage. We're going to our subject guides, to our law subject guides, and then the top guide here is AGLC3 referencing. In this guide we have a link to the AGLC3 guide itself, and here we'll find in part 3 domestic legislation and how it can be cited. We also have a range of examples for you to help guide you. So if you look at the legislation examples, these will give you examples of the Constitution, Acts of Parliament or statutes, delegated legislation, gazettes, bill and explanatory memoranda. We also have example text to assist you properly footnote and then accurately create a bibliography for all your references. Thank you for listening. If you ever do need help with referencing or checking the currency or accuracy of the version of legislation that you have, don't hesitate to contact us at the Law Library. That is something we can help with. So our contact details are here, and you're always welcome to come by and ask your questions. Hope that's been helpful for you, and we look forward to hearing from you.